Honeycrisp? The Honeycrisp was developed at the University of Minnesota, which has been breeding cold, hardy apples for over a century. It was the result of a cross made in 1960 using an apple called Keepsake, with an experimental breeding variety known as MN1627. But for a while, the university actually assumed the cross had failed. The original records were lost, and the seedling that would become Honeycrisp almost got discarded entirely. It survived almost by accident, sitting quietly in a test orchard while researchers paid attention to other more promising-looking varieties. The cells in a Honeycrisp are actually larger than in most other apples. So when you bite into one, those cells burst rather than compress, releasing a lot of juice all at once and producing that loud, distinctive crunch. The texture is firm but not hard, crisp without being dry. The flavor is usually sweet like honey with a little bit of tartness underneath, although some lower quality examples can taste watery or bland, depending on growing conditions. At its peak retail price, it was selling for 3 to 4 times the price of standard apples. The patent has now expired, which means anyone can grow it. But the difficulty of cultivation keeps supply tight enough that it remains a premium product at most grocery stores. Granny Smith. The Granny Smith is one of the most recognizable apples on Earth, and it got here entirely by accident. It was discovered in Australia in the 1860s on the property of Maria Ann Smith, an older woman who found a young tree growing out of a pile of compost near her farm. People believe the seeds may have come from a French crab apple she had thrown away, which could explain why Granny Smiths are so firm and so aggressively sour. Mrs. Smith noticed the apple was useful. It tasted refreshing and fresh and held its shape when cooked, which was a practical quality in an era when most dessert apples turned to mush in the oven. After her death, orchardists in New South Wales started growing it commercially, and today, it is one of the top 5 most widely grown apple varieties in the world. The flavor is sharply tangy with an almost citrus-like acidity and very little sweetness, which is genuinely unusual for an apple. Its high acidity also makes it one of the slowest to brown after cutting, which is why it shows up constantly in fruit platters and salads. Red Delicious. The Red Delicious is probably the most recognized apple in the world, and also the most controversial. It was first found as a chance seedling on the Iowa farm of Jesse Hyatt in the 1870s. But what happened over the next 100 years is a case study in what happens when appearance gets prioritized over flavor. Growers kept selecting for a deeper red color and a more dramatic 5-pointed base so it would stand out on grocery store shelves. They chose thicker skin and firmer flesh so the apples could survive long-distance shipping and months in cold storage. What they bred out, slowly and systematically, was everything that had made the original appealing. By the time most people were eating Red Delicious, the skin had become tough and slightly bitter, and the flesh had turned mealy, dry, and almost completely flavorless. When grown right and eaten at proper ripeness, you can get a crisp, refreshing apple with light floral and melon-like notes. Most people never see that version. Gala. The Gala was developed in New Zealand in the 1930s by an orchardist named J.H. Kidd, one of the most important apple breeders of the 20th century. He crossed his own earlier creation, Kidd's Orange Red, with Golden Delicious, and the result was eventually named Gala by his son-in-law to commemorate a royal visit from Queen Elizabeth II. It began reaching international markets in the 1970s and built steadily in the United States through the 1980s and 90s. Then in 2018, it surpassed Red Delicious in total U.S. production volume, which reflected a genuine shift in what consumers actually wanted. Gala is medium-sized with a yellow-orange background covered in orange-red stripes. The skin is thin. The flesh is cream-colored and crisp. The flavor is sweet and mild with low acidity. Most Gala apples sold today are sport varieties, meaning genetic mutations selected for deeper color or better growing performance. Royal Gala is the most dominant of these and has become so common that most people simply call it Gala without knowing the original striped version still exists. Fuji. The Fuji apple was developed in Japan in the 1930s by researchers who crossed 2 American varieties, the Rawls Janet and Red Delicious. It was officially released in Japan in 1962 and named after the town of Fujisaki. In Japan, Fuji apples are often individually wrapped in paper bags while still on the tree to protect them from insects and UV damage, producing a more uniform color and smoother skin. The variety is known for exceptionally high sugar content. Sometimes Fuji apples develop something called water core, a condition where parts of the apple fill with sorbitol, making the affected areas look almost translucent and taste intensely sweet, almost like honey. Some growers consider it a flaw because it shortens shelf life. Others think it makes the apple better. Fuji apples stored in a standard home refrigerator will stay crisp for months, which is exceptional compared to most varieties, and part of why they became so popular globally. Pink Pearl. The Pink Pearl hides its most interesting feature behind a completely plain exterior. The outside looks like a pale greenish-yellow apple and nothing remarkable. But cut it open, and the flesh inside is bright pink to a deep red, something that catches most people completely off guard the first time they see it. It was developed in 1944 by a California plant breeder named Albert Etter, working largely in isolation in Northern California, spending decades experimenting with unusual apple colors and flavor profiles. The pink color comes from anthocyanins, the same antioxidant pigments found in berries. In most apples, these pigments stay in the skin. In Pink Pearl, they develop in the flesh as well. The flavor is tart and bright, with notes that people often compare to raspberry or grapefruit. The texture is slightly softer than modern commercial apples, which is part of why it never made it into mainstream grocery stores. But at farmers markets and specialty orchards, it remains a genuine curiosity. Black Oxford. This apple was first found around 1790 on the farm of a man named Valentine in Oxford County, Maine. For generations of New England families, the Black Oxford was a critical winter food. People stored them in cool cellars after the autumn harvest and could still eat fresh fruit well into the following spring. The skin is very dark, ranging from deep purple to almost black when fully ripe. The flesh inside is white to cream colored with a fine, dense grain. The flavor is sweet and mild with a subtle wine-like quality. The texture is firm and the skin is thick. Where most modern apples last a few weeks before deteriorating, Black Oxfords can stay perfectly good for more than 6 months in the right conditions. That keeping quality was the whole point. In a world without refrigeration, an apple that lasted through winter was worth far more than one that tasted spectacular in October. Gravenstein. The Gravenstein is one of the oldest and most historically significant apples in the Western world, and also one of the most endangered. Its exact origin is debated, but the most commonly cited theory traces it to Gravenstein in what is now southern Denmark. The variety was well established in northern Germany and Scandinavia by the early 18th century, and it spread through Europe and then to North America as apple cultivation expanded. Russian fur traders brought it to the west coast of North America and planted a tree at Fort Ross in California in 1811. The apple is medium to large and slightly lopsided, with yellowish-green skin covered in orange stripes and sometimes a faint russeting. The taste is tart and fruity with a very pronounced aroma. It ripens early in the season, which is both an advantage and a problem. Early means first to market, but also that it does not store well at all. It must be eaten quickly or processed fast. Martinelli's, the famous apple juice company, built much of its early reputation on Gravenstein juice from California. Today, the acreage devoted to Gravenstein has shrunk dramatically as growers switch to more commercially reliable varieties. Esopus Spitzenberg. The Esopus Spitzenberg was first found in the early 1700s in Esopus, New York, and it has one of the most distinguished reputations in American apple history. It was also the favorite apple of Thomas Jefferson, who planted trees at Monticello and reportedly considered it the finest apple he had ever tasted. It was grown extensively throughout the Hudson Valley and into New England during the 18th and 19th centuries, and was considered for a long period the best American apple for dessert eating. The flavor is complex and bold. The first bite gives a big crunch and a burst of juice that is both intensely sweet and sharply tart at the same time. Many people describe it as spicy, kit with hints of cinnamon, clove, and nutmeg. Some even pick up notes of strawberry or a faint floral quality in the skin. The flesh is firm and dense with a slightly chewy texture. The problem is the tree. It is extremely prone to disease, demanding of climate, and difficult to grow at any commercial scale. You can sometimes still find these apples at small orchards or farmers markets in the Northeast, but it takes some searching. Arkansas Black. The Arkansas Black was first found in Benton County, Arkansas, around the early 1900s, during a period when the Ozarks were actually one of the top apple-growing regions in the United States. Moth infestations and the economic collapse of the Great Depression almost wiped it out, but it survived and is now a rare apple treasured by cider makers and heritage orchardists. The color is remarkable. A very deep purplish red that darkens to near black on the side facing the sun. The surface is waxy and polished, picking up a gloss that looks almost like lacquered wood. The flesh is pale yellow, extremely dense and harder than almost any other apple you are likely to encounter. Biting into a freshly harvested Arkansas Black in October is almost startling. The flavor is sharp, astringent, and intensely tannic, not pleasant to eat off the tree. But if you put these apples in a cool cellar from October until January or February, something happens. The flesh softens slightly, the tannins mellow, the acidity rounds out, and the apple develops a flavor profile with notes of anise, dark cherry, spice, and wine. It essentially ages like cheese, developing character through cell breakdown and flavor concentration. This makes it exceptional for cider and for cooking, and a genuinely interesting thing to experience if you can find one at the right time of year. Ananas rennet. The ananas rennet, sometimes called the pineapple rennet, is a small yellow apple that has been grown in European orchards for hundreds of years. It most likely originated in the Netherlands around the 1500s. The name comes from the French word for pineapple, which tells you immediately what to expect. When you bite into it, the taste is sharp and lively with strong notes that people consistently compare to pineapple, lemon, and pear. There is a sour kick that sets it completely apart from modern supermarket apples, which tend to be bred almost entirely for sweetness. If the apples are stored for a few weeks after harvest, the sharp edge softens and the tropical aroma becomes more pronounced. It adds a distinctive flavor punch to cider and works well in desserts where its combination of sugar and acidity gives the final dish considerably more depth than a blander variety would. Knobbed russet. The knobbed russet is often called the ugliest apple in existence. That description is not an exaggeration. The skin is rough and completely uneven, covered in thick gray and brown russet patches, bumps and irregular lumps that make it look almost geological. No modern supermarket would carry it because it could never survive the aesthetic standards of commercial produce. But inside, the flesh is very crisp, rich, and sweet with a slightly nutty pear-like flavor that surprises almost everyone who gets past the appearance. It is also one of the oldest cultivated apple varieties still surviving today. It exists largely because of organizations like the Brogdale Collections in Kent, England, which maintains the National Fruit Collection, the largest repository of fruit varieties in the world. Without these preservation efforts, varieties like the knobbed russet would quietly disappear, and with them goes something irreplaceable about the genetic history of the apple. Cox's Orange Pippin. The Cox's Orange Pippin was raised by a retired brewer named Richard Cox in Buckinghamshire, England, around 1830, likely from a seed of the Ribston Pippin variety. It became the definitive English dessert apple for well over a century. The skin is a complex mix of orange, red, and green, often with a faint russeting around the stem. The flesh is fine-grained, pale yellow, and extremely juicy. The flavor is rich, honeyed, and aromatic with a complexity that unfolds slowly as you chew, offering hints of mandarin orange, pear, and a slightly nutty warmth underneath. The acidity is balanced perfectly against the sweetness, giving the apple a depth that most modern commercial varieties simply do not have. The problem is that Cox is notoriously difficult to grow. It is susceptible to scab, canker, and mildew, and demands very specific conditions to perform at its best. In a warm, dry autumn, it is extraordinary. In a wet year, it can be a near total disaster. That fragility is a large part of why it never dominated global markets the way it dominated English kitchens. Calville Blanc d'Hiver. This apple has been considered the finest dessert apple in France for roughly 400 years. It is the variety required by tradition for the classic tarte tatin. The shape is unusual, uneven and lumpy with pronounced lobes at the base. The Calville Blanc has an exceptionally high acid content, combined with rich, complex sweetness, and an aromatic quality that has been described as wine-like, honeyed, and faintly spicy. It is an apple that keeps revealing layers as you eat it rather than delivering one single immediate impression. It is also one of the highest known sources of vitamin C in any apple variety, containing roughly 4 to 5 times the vitamin C of a typical commercial apple. It was reportedly used in France as a treatment for scurvy before the connection to vitamin C was formally understood. Most of the world has never heard of it. In France, it never left. Candle Sinap. This is a Turkish variety that was once extremely popular in the Ottoman Empire and nearly disappeared in 1944 when Stalin forcibly exiled the Tatar population from Crimea, scattering the communities that had traditionally grown it. It comes from the Sinop region of northern Turkey along the Black Sea coast. The name refers to the distinctive tall, narrow shape of the fruit, elongated and slightly tapered in a way that looks almost architectural. It was grown extensively in imperial Ottoman gardens and described in manuscripts from the 17th and 18th centuries as one of the finest dessert apples available to the palace. The flavor is delicate, sweet, and highly aromatic, with a fine texture and an unusually gentle, clear juice. It lacks the bold acidity of most Western European varieties. Niedzwiecki's apple. This is a species of wild apple native to the mountainous regions of Central Asia, and possibly the most important single plant in the entire history of apple cultivation. Almost every part of the tree is red or purple. The flowers are deep crimson. The leaves are reddish-purple. The bark is reddish, and the flesh of the fruit is red all the way from skin to core. It is one of only a small number of apple species where anthocyanin pigments penetrate every tissue of the tree rather than just the fruit skin. That pigmentation became the genetic source for an enormous percentage of the red-fleshed and red-skinned apple varieties that exist today, including pink pearl and dozens of modern cultivars bred specifically to carry red flesh into new hybrids. The fruit itself is small, astringent, and not at all pleasant to eat fresh. Its value is almost entirely genetic and scientific. Pink Lady. The Pink Lady, also sold under its variety name Cripps Pink, was developed in Western Australia in the 1970s by horticulturist John Cripps. He crossed Golden Delicious with Lady Williams, a late-season Australian variety known for its firmness and acidity. The result combined the sweetness of Golden Delicious with a sharp, refreshing tartness, and a dense flesh that could survive a very long growing season and extensive cold storage. Pink Lady is grown under strict licensing arrangements, meaning only approved orchards can sell apples under that name, and the fruit must meet specific standards of sweetness and firmness before it qualifies. The flavor is bright and almost effervescent on the palate with a clean tartness that finishes sweet. The skin is a vivid pinkish red over a yellow-green base. It became one of the most commercially successful apple launches of the late 20th century, and now appears in grocery stores across Europe, Australia, and North America. Rubinette. The Rubinette is a Swiss apple that many serious tasters consider among the best in the world for eating fresh. It was bred by Walter Hauenstein in the 1950s and released commercially in 1966. His goal was to take the reliable growing characteristics of Golden Delicious and combine them with the extraordinary flavor of Cox's Orange Pippin. He largely succeeded. The Rubinette kept the complex aromatic quality of the Cox, but added extra sweetness and richness. The apple is small to medium-sized with a yellow base covered in orange and dull red streaks. The taste is strong and honey-like, both sweet and lightly sharp simultaneously, with hints some describe as pear, vanilla, or almond. Apple experts consistently rank it among the highest for overall eating quality. The complication is that growing it is genuinely difficult. The trees are weak and prone to disease. Growers have to thin the blossoms aggressively so the tree focuses its energy on fewer, better fruits. The combination of low yield, high disease pressure, and small fruit size means very few commercial operations bother with it, which is why most people have never seen one. Macintosh. The Macintosh was discovered around 1811 on the Ontario farm of John Macintosh, who found the seedling while clearing land and moved it to a more sheltered spot, where it survived and eventually began producing fruit. His son Alan later learned how to graft it and started distributing trees, which is how the variety spread across Canada and into the northeastern United States. It became the dominant apple of New England and eastern Canada for much of the 20th century. The flavor is tart, juicy, and deeply aromatic, with a winey quality and a tender, slightly soft white flesh. The aroma is something people recognize immediately. It is one of the most distinctly fragrant apples in existence. The weakness is texture. The flesh breaks down relatively quickly after harvest and becomes soft and unpleasant if not eaten soon enough. That same tender flesh makes it useful for applesauce,